All right. So this is it's my best attempt at telling my friends, family, loved ones, acquaintances, strangers, why I don't think it's good to be sitting on a pile of cash right now. The too long didn't read. I don't know how long this will be. I wrote it out, but we'll see. Too long didn't read is that inflation is making your savings less valuable to you. And if you don't already feel that, by the time the dust settles from this pandemic and from the fiscal decision making globally, but here in the U.S., you will, right? So in order to maintain what you believe is your financial standings, right, your relative savings value, you're going to need to grow your savings by equal to or greater than your personal felt inflation, right? And so we'll talk about inflation and the numbers that you hear on TV versus your felt inflation rate. And then in order to, passively grow or, let's say without actively adding to your savings or increasing your earnings, you'll want to move money out of savings and checking accounts as much as you can. We can talk about what's the right amount. But move money out of savings and checking at the very least and move them into some form or another of an investment account. In this episode, I'm going to talk about Vanguard, specifically the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Funds, VTSAX, as it's affectionately known. But really any low fee total market index fund, as the Vanguard Total Stock mirrors the S&P 500. Probably too much detail, but move money out of checking and savings into something like VTSAX. But most importantly, perhaps, do your own research. I am not a pro. I don't pretend to be a pro. I don't want to consider this advice so much as this is the way that I'm thinking about my money, my family's money, and this is information that I find valuable and want to share. But at the end of the day, don't trust me. I did not stay at a Holiday Inn last night. And if you don't remember those commercials, that's okay. So let's talk about inflation, right? Inflation eats your money. And I don't think that is a perfect metaphor because inflation perhaps isn't hungry or doesn't have motivation. So let's see if we can find a better one. Okay, so imagine being a waiter, right? You work at a restaurant. Maybe this is harder today in pandemic days, but you work at a restaurant. You save 50% of your cash tips in a shoebox under your bed for an entire year. Let's say that you made $20,000 of tips over that year. I don't know if that's good, bad, or otherwise, but I know that it helps with math. So that is $10,000 in the shoebox, right? Because you take half of your tips and put them under your bed. That's a very conservative approach. Good on you. You know that savings is important. Nice. Now, what is the issue? The issue with that is that there is a rat, maybe a mouse, but rats are scarier to me. Mouse also pretty creepy, but rat scary. In your apartment. I don't want a rat in my apartment, but if there were one and this rat only cared about one thing and was eating your money, what would you do? Right? So of that $10,000, let's say that rat eats $700, just like individual tens at a time or 100. How would you feel? Does that feel like that would suck? I think it might. That's a lot of cash. Either way, no matter how you slice it, that's a lot of cash. $700. You can't spend that $700. It's gone. You don't get to do CPR on the rat and get the money out. It's gone, never to be seen or heard from again. So what if instead of $700, that rat ate $2,000 of your $10,000? How would you feel then? Okay. So this is what I'm trying to argue is what's going on today, whether or not you know it. And that's what's happening with the money in your checking and savings account. $700 I think we get to it ahead, but that's about what the government's telling you. 2,000 is about what I think I'm feeling and my bar that I'm setting. So, first, before we get into inflation and what I'm thinking about, there's like no shade, right? So I have no judgment on how much money you have in checking or savings. I have historically attempted to keep a lot of cash on hand. And a lot is relative, but a lot for me, in my checking accounts, savings accounts are relatively new for me. I've done that because I'll say that I didn't learn money. In the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, famous finance book. I don't know if I necessarily really had a rich dad. And so as far as I can say, my childhood, I didn't seem like people were paying attention to finances or doing anything that was intentional or very strategic with savings or investments. I can remember very, very clearly setting this like 5-figure goal, right? I just wanted to get to $10,000. But I was living on my own in New York, and credit card debt kept getting bigger. Checking account would have thousands, but never 10,000. And once it did, I never wanted to go back. I wanted to stack money and watch it grow. But 10,000 in an account, huge milestone. I don't have 6 figures in any accounts. And so it's still, I guess the only milestone in my world, but I have multiple now 5-figure accounts, and I have attempted to get particularly informed about finances. And so historically, I've seen money in checking accounts as a proxy for financial security, right? The more that I have in savings or in checking, the more time that I have, the more options that I have, the more choices that I will eventually be able to either afford to take and risks that I can afford to take. And so I've kept it there to see it primarily. And when I started, I'll call it the golden age of high interest checking accounts. And that was only, a handful of years ago. But when I started paying attention, like I used Ally Bank, I think they would pay over 2% interest on money sitting in a checking account. And so like every month you get something between a coffee's worth of money to sometimes like a dinner's worth of money. You didn't have to do anything. You put money in a checking account, it would just grow. And so today, the current age, I wouldn't call it the golden age. I don't know what the right age, but the idea is that there is 0% interest, or what rounds to 0% interest on the money that you're keeping in checking, and definitely the money that you're keeping in savings accounts. And so for thousands of dollars now, you get like 2, 7, 8 cents of interest added. You get nothing. Your money does nothing when it's in a checking and savings account. So if we go back to the metaphor that we started with, the checking and savings accounts is the shoebox, right? If you put $10,000 of your waiter tips in a shoebox on January 1st of 2022, there will be just a hair more than $10,000 on January 1st of 2023. So the next year, there'll be just a hair, a marginal, a rounding error of difference between what you started with and what you ended with, given today's current interest rates. And so with that, let's go back and let's look at inflation, right? Let's assume for a second that $10,000 is in a checking account, right? It's flat. We just said that, right? You will not be able to buy the issue. Yes. So it'll be flat. The dollars will be the same, but that $10,000 will not be worth as much as it is now. So a year from now, same amount of money, dollars wise, not worth as much, unable to purchase as much a year from now as you will be today. And that's inflation working. right? Inflation takes away your ability to purchase. And so if we revisit the metaphor, right, rather than that rat eating your dollar bills, time is going to be eating your dollar bills. The money stays the same, but your ability to purchase, your ability to spend, your ability to buy things that matter to you will be affected as though a rat is eating your money. So let's look at inflation rate, right? The government, as of recording, saying that inflation is about 7%, or matter of fact, 7%. But if you ask me, I think that number is low. The way that they calculate inflation rates is using a basket of goods, and I think that basket of goods is silly, for a lack of a better term. I don't think it represents my reality. And so while that basket is relatively, let's say, well known, and perhaps because that basket is relatively well known, there's a bunch of weird stuff. You can look to examples, I believe, in Turkey, where they forbade the price of milk to go up, thereby kind of tricking the basket into remaining relatively low price. And so rather than take 7% at face value and say that that's what we need to beat, I think we can look into our own worlds, build a spreadsheet, or just think about it, and we can look at our own felt inflations. And so felt inflation isn't a word, that's my word, I think. But it's, what does the inflation feel like to you? It will feel different for everybody based on what they like, what they buy, what they do. And so here's a way, I would say, to consider it, right? So it's like, consider these questions. How much could you sell your house, your parents' house, your grandparents' house for today versus a year ago, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago? There's a good chance that number is meaningfully higher than it was 3 years ago. I'm not saying that's 100% inflation, but let's just say it's affected by inflation, or the ability to use $200,000 today is less buying power than 3 years ago. How much is your grocery bill today versus 2 years ago? A way that inflation is sometimes hidden is by asking how much food, how much stuff is in the box, right? So assuming you're buying a bag of chips, how many ounces are those bag of chips? Is it still 6 ounces or is it 4 for the same price, right? And so that's a version, shrinkage is a version of inflation. How much is the total cost of your streaming service? Netflix has gone up. What other streaming services are you paying for? I think it's interesting, right? So 2 years ago, the amount of your reoccurring charges, what does it look like versus today? Those are a little bit stickier, harder to change, but when they do, it's forever and they don't go down. So other memberships and subscriptions, how much does gas cost by you? How much is parking? We had parking at our office in Asheville. Parking went up this year 25%. So it used to cost us $60. It now they are charging $75. So that's 25% inflation on the cost of parking. Gas, commute, tolls. Have you tried to build anything recently? How much does lumber cost versus 3 years ago? How much does plywood cost? How much does sheetrock cost? How much does insert any material that goes into the production of the thing that you're making? How much is shipping? Is Amazon getting you packages in 24 hours like they used to? A version of inflation is the reduction of convenience. Reduction of convenience is a version of inflation. So cost you just the same, less convenient. And then last question, how much could you sell your car for versus 3 years ago? I'll tell you that anecdotally, our 2017 Subaru Crosstrek, the Kelley Blue Book says it's worth more today than we paid for it in 2019. So strange, but not unique. And so I think I jumped ahead on my anecdotally. Car, yep, sells for more than we bought it for. House supplies, we purchased a 100-year-old home or just about. And in some cases, the materials that we needed are 50% more expensive than they were 2 years ago. So 7% is a cute number. It's still insanely high based on historical trends. I wonder if this will be anything worth looking at. Anyway, I'll put the link to it. You got to click some buttons to make it worthwhile, but that shows you all of the inflation and consumer price index numbers. You can play with it. So using my anecdotes and using some back of the napkin math, I think that my felt inflation is around 20%. You can do your own math. Just remember that if it's 7%, what the Federal Reserve says, I think it's safe to say it is equal to or greater than 7% in reality. And so your number will be your number. The number that I'm aiming to beat is 20%. So I've opened all of these. Now let's go back to thinking about that number, right? So the question is, what do you do with the money in your shoebox now that we know that inflation's at least 7, potentially 20, potentially more percent? The short answer is put that money to work. The long answer is it depends on what kind of temperament you have and what you're hoping to be positioned for on the backside of this pandemic. What does positioned mean? Well, let's break it into 3 categories. One is, I just want to get through this and not get hurt too bad. Okay. The other is, ideally, I get out on the other side and I'm even Stevens. I'm just like, I rode the tsunami and it was exhilarating perhaps, and I survived. The other is like, I see disruption and crazy times in the market as a time to actually make money. What might I do then? I don't want to say that I have the answers to all 3 of those, but all 3 of them at the very least mean that you don't keep your money exclusively in cash. So let's just talk about what I'll call safe, and safe is all relative, and it is not risk-free, but safest and most likely to at least lessen the effect of inflation is going to be put your money into low-fee index funds. Specifically, as I mentioned before, the Vanguard's total stock market index fund, Admiral Shares, I believe, has the lowest fee of all of them. And the reasoning for this is, by buying this single investment, you are seeing diversification, meaning you're buying a basket of companies, 500. It's meant to mirror the S&P 500. So you're buying a basket of companies, and those companies are while they're primarily technology companies, let's say, but they're global, they're diversified, and they are all likely to grow, in part because the smallest of those 500, if it goes bankrupt and disappears, number 501 comes in, and now there is a new top 500 businesses, and some of those businesses are going to do capitalist things and survive and even thrive through the pandemic. And so the ability to grow up is unlimited. The ability to shrink as these 500 is capped because they will be replaced. And so it is diversified and it is self-correcting. In 2021, I looked it up, and the S&P gained 26.9% for the year. So if you had $10,000 in the S&P 500, you would end the year with $12,690. And that's important because we talked about how the relative ability to purchase is going to decrease per dollar. What else makes Vanguard important is at the lowest cost. Making money is a equation, right? So it's the money you start with times how much that money grows as a percentage. And then you're going to minus any kind of fees that you have to pay for that growth, right? That's how you get your returns. So it's money you start with and the growth minus any of the fees for accessing that investment is going to be how you calculate growth. And so as you can see with a couple variables, there's a couple ways to change the overall returns of an investment. The easiest, in my opinion, is to not lose money in management fees. You want to have as little or no cost when it comes to making your next marginal dollar. And so Vanguard has the lowest fees of any investment organization. I'm sure that recently there have been other ones that have come out with comparable things. I will say, though, that you do want some fee, right? Like Robinhood, air quotes, no fees, but you don't pay fees because they're selling your trades, the information about your trades, and people are beating you in the market. Vanguard, it's technically like a co-op, right? You become an owner in Vanguard, and as an owner, it's now you're incentivized to want to grow the business, and you grow the business and you grow your investment by keeping management fees as low as possible. And so it's not uncommon to see 20% management fees if you have a financial advisor, if you're in a hedge fund or a mutual fund, or like money is being bled out of that growth. And so to have had an investment where there's a 20% fee, you would have needed to see 50% growth in that investment just to match the S&P 500. And so some people do that sometimes. Almost no one's able to do that consistently. And so it's safest, easiest, simplest to go with the lowest cost option. And then finally, it's highly liquid. So you'll be able to sell these Vanguard shares if needed, whenever, right? So rather than putting your money into, I'll say antique chairs, which might be a great investment if you know something about antique chairs. There aren't maybe that many buyers for antique chairs, but there's definitely a market for this Vanguard fund. And so I'd say the worst, maybe looking at 5 days to see money in a checking account if you ever needed to access it for any reasoning. So I think it's diversified and self-correcting. It's very low cost, which means that each marginal dollar you make, you generally keep. And it is highly liquid. So if you ever needed to get out of a position, you could. Cool. So inflation, checked. Market returns, check. So how much do you put in your investments, right? Knowing that Vanguard or something similar to it is going to be the right thing to do. I think it depends. I think it depends on who you are. And here's some ways that I like to think about it is runway of cash that you need. What do you consider the security of your job and income? How comfortable are you with technology? And are there going to be alternatives? So how much money are you spending each month? I've, especially recently, had some changes in my own life. I am dialed right now on how much money we're spending. We're paying super close attention. This is important. So you'll want your cash in a checking or savings account to be some multiple of months worth of expenses. So that's your rent, your mortgage, your car payments, your student loans. In addition, so those are the guaranteed, and then in addition to your variable expected investments. So some people say a year. I think that's very aggressive if you're the type of person who's able to bet on themselves. I think 6 months, some people say, also is potentially aggressive. To me, it's this is an individual question. And one of the things you can consider is like, do you get paychecks monthly? Do you work in a job where there's a union and it's going to be hard to fire you? Okay. So, realize it's been 25 minutes. I'm going to wrap this up quickly. So, how comfortable are you with your income and your job? Are you an independent contractor? Are you self-directed on your revenue? Or are you in a position that's hard to fire, right? Another question is, how comfortable are you with technology and websites and tracking your account balances, right? So the less that you want to be like active, the more space you might want to provide in your finances. But I think that almost always, if you're someone who would self-identify as like unsure of your finances and maybe like raise your hand when and you would say, I'm not great with money, then it's time to look under the bed. It's time to check the closet and shine some light in this finance space. And the way to do that is to pay close attention to your finances. And with close attention, when you pay attention to things, when you track things, they grow. And so giving your job, and the last note on that is alternatives, right? Giving your money a job to invest in the stock market could mean other things as well, right? So 20% return on the stock market is interesting. 20% return via taking an online class on web development or graphic design or sales, right? I think you can easily turn a 20% return by investing in yourself. Can you buy an asset? Can you buy something that will hand you money month after month? Maybe not, but that's a good place to think about. Maybe leverage with debt, different conversation. And then is there a world where you add more income into your life? And so how much should you put into your investments? It depends on how you want to think about things. Just definitely think about things. And so let's review. There's a rat eating your money, and rather than hide your money under your bed, you should give it a job. You should put it to work. At a minimum, your money is going to be 7% less valuable, as that is the stated inflation rate. That means that you will be able to buy less things with the money that you have saved a year from now than you can buy today, or less things with the money that you have saved now than you could a year ago. 7% is stated. Your felt inflation is almost certainly going to be higher. I gave you some ways to think about how to calculate it. The simplest next move is to move your money into a low-fee index fund and then strap on and hope that Vanguard grows at over 20 or 30% for this year. Impossible to know, but it will be certainly better than keeping your money in a savings account. Bunch of other advice that finance folks and crypto folk might tell you. I think that this is my best understanding of the state of things, and I hope that it was helpful. And if it wasn't, let me know what I missed or what you need more clarity on. If it was, share it with somebody who you think might appreciate this or that you could have a conversation with about this that could help hold you accountable. Thank you.